Hey everyone, and welcome back to the WellBe podcast. This podcast is designed to help you learn, expand what you thought was possible, and become as empowered as you can be in your health. This episode is one of the best things I do, straight up. It's called the WellBe Wrap-Up, and if you've been around the WellBe community for a while, you're probably familiar with it. Every few months, I go through all the important news that's come out related to health and wellness and pick out 5 to 10 of the most important stories that I think you really need to know to protect your and your family's health and make easy changes shown to improve your health. Sometimes the things I share are shocking, sometimes they're just cool nuggets, but the stories are always chosen because I know it can make a difference in your health. This go around, there were just so many important stories that we couldn't narrow it down like we normally do. Instead, we're playing around with a new format, offering you 5 big, juicy health topics with WellBe analysis, including 2 huge debunkings that are rocking the scientific community currently, plus 7 quick hits that you can choose to learn more about if you go to the written version of this and click on the links. And for the first time in literally years, there's no COVID news in this wrap-up, so that's something to celebrate. Before we jump in, October, if you can believe it's already here, is Breast Cancer Awareness Month. And because we think breast cancer prevention is such an important topic and so doable if you understand the root causes of breast cancer in most cases, we're offering our Spark Health program, which is a 6-week program to detox your home and lifestyle of the products, foods, and practices that we know play a big role in breast cancer for 50% off the normal price. Head to getwellbe.com to snag this program while this massive sale is on. Included in our Spark Health program is a free year of access to our famous non-toxic product database with over 2,000 vetted, rated, and recommended products with easy links for purchasing in every category you can think of to make it much easier to live in a cancer-preventing way. All right, now let's dive in with the July to September 2022 WellBe Wrap-Up. Story number 1. A comprehensive, exhaustive meta-analysis of previous research has determined that the idea that depression is due to a chemical imbalance and low levels of serotonin has no scientific basis. Just let that sink in. This is huge news. The notion that depression is caused by an imbalance of chemicals in the brain, specifically suboptimal levels of serotonin, was first proposed in 1965 by a Harvard psychiatrist. In the 50-plus years since then, repeated research has called that hypothesis into question, and yet the belief persists among the public in clinical settings and throughout the mental health industry. Surveys show that up to 90% of people think low serotonin causes depression, 90%, and 46% of psychology students, so nearly half of all the psychology students out there, report being taught this theory. This new study brings together a massive amount of research and other documents from the past 5 decades to show, somewhat definitively, that this theory has no basis in science. Notably, their findings revealed that the FDA was skeptical of the serotonin theory and only allowed SSRIs, which are selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, a class of antidepressants that is meant to raise serotonin levels in the brain, to be marketed with clear qualifying phrases such as depression may be caused by a chemical imbalance. SSRIs may modestly outcompete placebo, which is presumed to be due to the serotonin. There was no actual research to back up the idea of SSRIs as an effective treatment for depression. It was, as the lead researchers on this study put it, the marketing of a myth, and there is, in fact, no such thing as a correct balance of serotonin in our brains. The study is a peer-reviewed umbrella review that included meta-analyses and other systematic reviews on serotonin involving tens of thousands of participants. The takeaway from this impressive and exhaustive review is simple. There is no support for the hypothesis that depression is caused by lowered serotonin activity or concentrations. One of the biggest consequences of this pervasive fallacy has been the rise in antidepressant prescriptions in our culture. The popularity of the serotonin theory has led to an explosion of prescriptions of SSRIs and other antidepressants since the 1990s. While it was once rare to be prescribed one, now over 13% of Americans take antidepressants. As you know, I've never been a fan of taking pharmaceuticals when there might be other more holistic ways to understand the root causes of a problem like depression, and this staggering new research makes it abundantly clear that SSRI antidepressants have no scientific basis for helping with depression. What's more, it underscores the importance of doing your own research rather than relying on conventional wisdom or a doctor's advice. Countless people have made uninformed decisions about taking antidepressants because they, understandably, chose to trust their practitioner, who was likely marketed to by pharmaceutical company reps and did not perhaps even know that antidepressants were not evidence-supported. Story number 2. A new investigation uncovered evidence that findings from an influential 2006 study may have been fabricated to falsely support the idea that Alzheimer's is caused by a certain type of plaque in the brain. This is another huge rocking in the scientific community, not quite as big as the depression one, but almost. In an off-cited 2006 study published in the journal Nature, researchers put forth the theory that a subtype of protein, amyloid beta star 56, were the main causes of Alzheimer's, causing sticky plaques in the brain that interfere with cognitive function. This caused a big splash and became one of the leading theories of Alzheimer's etiology. 16 years later, however, a 6-month investigation from Science magazine exposed evidence that images in the study may have been doctored. Tipped off by a whistleblower, researchers looked into the evidence and found that more than 20 suspect papers and over 70 instances where an image may have been tampered with to inflate the role of the amyloid beta star 56 protein in the development of Alzheimer's. Coupled with the fact that researchers were unable to replicate the results of the 2006 study, this cast extreme doubt over the plaque hypothesis. In part due to this 2006 study, more than $1 billion of government funding has gone toward amyloid-related Alzheimer's research. That's our money. If you are a taxpayer, that's all of our money. And while experts say that the theory shouldn't be completely discredited, it's hard not to feel that this funding may have been wasted. We're reminded yet again to not blindly trust something just because it's published in a scientific journal. Things need to be both peer-reviewed and replicated in order to be reliable. The good news is that we do have actual evidence of things that can both cause and prevent cognitive decline. In fact, let's get into that right now. Story number 3 is about 2 new studies that show that both HSV, which is the herpes virus, and a lack of fitness in childhood can lead to dementia, while 3 others identified potential ways to protect against it: keeping a routine, getting regular exercise, and taking omega-3 supplements. While the plaque theory of Alzheimer's progression has been called into question and pretty much debunked at this point, 2 studies suggest some other potential causes. For some time, researchers have been looking into whether herpes simplex virus type 1, called HSV1, is related to Alzheimer's, and have found that the microbe exists in the human brain of older people, and when combined with a specific genetic factor, can raise risk of developing Alzheimer's disease. A new study by these same researchers looked at a different kind of herpes virus, VZV, the one that causes chickenpox and shingles, and found that it was associated with inflammation in the brain and reactivation of HSV, which is that other herpes virus I was talking about, herpes simplex virus, which can remain dormant for years in the body. Their conclusion? In humans, viral infections like VZV can cause inflammation in the brain and reactivate the dormant HSV1 virus. Another study followed 1,200 people over the course of 30 years, mapping their childhood fitness levels to their cognitive function later in life. In the initial part of the study, participants between age 7 and 15 had their fitness assessed, so their cardiovascular ability, their strength, their endurance, and their waist-to-hip ratio measured. In the follow-up, some 30 years later, participants used a series of computerized tests to assess their cognitive function. Researchers found that people who were the most fit as kids had the highest processing speed and attention and overall cognitive function. But the benefits of fitness don't stop in childhood. Yet another study found that regular exercise in adulthood can slow mental decline. The 18-month study followed 300 or so participants over the age of 65 with mild cognitive impairment. They were all assigned to either an aerobic training program or a regimen of less intense stretching exercises. Over the period of the study, none of the participants experienced cognitive decline, while a control group who didn't exercise at all showed significant decline over the same time period. This is the longest MCI, or mild cognitive impairment, study to date, and is pretty powerful evidence that fitness for older adults matters a lot in terms of dementia prevention. And it's not just official exercise that matters for your brain, it's your activity level overall. A study published in JAMA found that older adults who rise early, stay active throughout the day, and stick to a regular routine, all three are important, have better cognitive performance than those who don't. The study measured the activity of 1,800 adults over age 65 for 7 days using fitness trackers and grouped them into 3 categories: those who got up early, stayed active throughout the day, and kept a consistent daily routine; those who got up early and were less active but had consistent routines; and those who had no consistent routine. After the activity tracking portion, researchers assessed their cognitive function and mental health with questionnaires. The results showed that those in the first group were the happiest and had the best cognitive function. Those in the second group had markedly worse cognition and were more depressed. And those in the last group had the highest rates of depression and the worst cognitive function. So besides staying active, what else can you do to keep your brain healthy? Well, recent research suggests something pretty darn easy that might help: taking omega-3 supplements. And actually, WellBe has just published a great new guide to healthy fats, which talks all about omega-3, so definitely check that out. Also, of course, eating omega-3 rich foods. Foods are always better than supplements, but of course, if you can't always get as many omega-3 rich foods as you'd like, then certainly taking the supplement is great. In a new study, researchers looked at about 1,500 participants under the age of 65 and found that those with the highest levels of DHA, which is a type of omega-3 fat, were 49% less likely. So 50%, let's say, less likely to develop Alzheimer's. That's a pretty amazing number. DHA is thought to protect against Alzheimer's by reducing inflammation in the brain and can be found in foods like fatty fish, so things like salmon, sardines, mackerel, as well as, of course, omega-3 supplements. While every organ you have is important, the brain arguably trumps them all, so protecting it is incredibly important. What's more, there's no current treatment available for Alzheimer's, so prevention is vital. Thankfully, as this abundance of research shows us, there are things you can do. Staying fit, and if you have kids, encouraging them to engage in regular physical activity for their later years, keeping a routine as much as you can, and taking an omega-3 supplement or eating omega-3 rich foods like wild salmon are all pretty low-hanging fruit that can make an enormous difference for your future. We're setting a reoccurring alarm for 7 a.m., or in my case, with a new baby, I'm up anyway between 6:30 and 7, and adding omega-3s to our shopping list every week. Story number 4 is a 3-part story about pesticides and your health. First, the good news. The EU has announced a plan to cut pesticide use in half by 2030. Then a federal court rejected the Trump-era finding that glyphosate, the active ingredient in Roundup, is safe. Then the scary news. A large government study found that glyphosate, i.e. Roundup, was present in the urine of 80% of the U.S. population. This is pervasive and dangerous. Wow. The European Commission proposed a law that would aim to cut pesticide use in half by 2030 and completely ban pesticide use near schools, playgrounds, and hospitals. While it could take up to a year to become official legislation, after which EU members will have 2 years to create plans to meet certain targets, the law is part of a larger set of goals to restore 20% of land and seas and reduce biodiversity loss. There's also pesticide progress on our side of the Atlantic. In 2020, so during the Trump administration, the EPA issued a finding stating that glyphosate doesn't pose any risk to human health and is not likely to cause cancer. That's curious. This past summer, a federal appeals court rejected that finding, saying that it was not supported by substantial evidence and also accused the EPA at that time of shirking their duty to consider the Endangered Species Act. Bayer, the company that owns Monsanto, the maker of Roundup, the most widely used herbicide in the world, is currently being sued by thousands of people who claim exposure to the chemical caused their cancer. Many of those lawsuits have now been won on behalf of the plaintiff. The EPA is now in the process of reviewing the ruling and will determine next steps from there. And hopefully they don't take too long to determine these next steps, since the issue of glyphosate in our environment is a pressing one. A new government study, which was part of a CDC program, examined urine samples from a representative group of 2,300 Americans, nearly a third of whom were kids, and found that 80% of them had glyphosate in their urine. Bayer has already said it will remove glyphosate from Roundup for their residential market by 2023. But given that industrial farms grow most of our food and they can still use it, we're unlikely to see the risk caused by this herbicide go down. While the EU ban and the court rulings are steps in the right direction, this collection of stories reminds us once again that our health is often not a priority for the government and big corporations, making it essential that we take steps to protect ourselves and our loved ones. In the case of glyphosate, thankfully, the workaround is fairly simple. Buy organic whenever possible. And if you have a yard or are near a golf course, make sure you talk to whoever is in charge to make sure they are not using Roundup. Story number 5 is a 2-part story about forever chemicals. New research shows that forever chemicals can more than quadruple your risk of developing liver cancer. Thankfully, the EPA has also announced new drinking water health advisories for those chemicals, and a scientific breakthrough may mean that these chemicals no longer stick around forever. This is so exciting. Forever chemicals are all the thousands of chemicals that fall into the category known as PFAS. And the full word is so complicated, I'm just going to leave it at PFAS. They got their nickname because they can take years to degrade in the body and the environment. And they've been linked to a variety of health issues. They're commonly found in kitchenware, like nonstick pans, but also in tap water, waterproof clothing, cleaning products, and more. A new study compared 50 people, so not a huge number, but it's worth noting, who had developed liver cancer with 50 others who did not, so a total of 100 people in the study. They analyzed pre-diagnosis blood samples from the cancer group and compared it with the control group, and found that those who were in the top 10% of exposure to PFAS chemicals were 4.5 times more likely to develop liver cancer. In better news, the EPA released 4 new drinking water health advisories for PFAS. These advisories indicate the maximum level of PFAS that can exist in drinking water before adverse health effects occur, and are meant to guide federal, state, and local officials in their plans and policies around drinking water. Along with the advisories, the agency also invited states and territories to apply for $1 billion in grants meant to address PFAS in drinking water. These advisories are a good thing, especially coupled with the fact that earlier this year, the EPA cut the acceptable level of PFAS in household products by more than 99%. That's huge. However, they do nothing to address the fact that many people already have PFAS-containing products in their homes where they can be doing serious damage. A new scientific breakthrough might help that. PFAS are called forever chemicals because they're incredibly difficult to break down. They contain many carbon and fluorine bonds, which are the strongest bonds in organic chemistry, and the reason that PFAS are so good at repelling water, oil, and stains, hence why they're used in waterproof clothing and nonstick pans. But new research out of Northwestern University, where I went to grad school, might have found a way to break them down inexpensively by using sodium hydroxide, a common chemical compound used in household products like soap and painkillers. More research is needed, but scientists are hopeful that this method could be used to both destroy the contaminants in existing products and filter them out of drinking water in the future. Scientific breakthroughs and consumer protecting bans are great, but just as with pesticides, we know that we can't rely on corporations or the government to keep us safe from harmful chemicals. To that end, we'll continue to use a high-quality water filter and only fill our homes with vetted non-toxic products from where? The WellBe non-toxic product database, of course. All right, now here are a few health quick hits we thought you needed to know that are much shorter, and you can read the written version of this episode on getwellbe.com, and you'll find all the links to these stories there if you want to dive in further. Story number 6 is about breastfeeding. The American Academy of Pediatrics updated its breastfeeding guidelines for the first time in a long time. The first time actually in 10 years, since 2012. While they've long advised that mothers breastfeed from 6 months to 1 year, they now advise 6 months to 2 years. And many experts, including my lactation consultant, who I had on the podcast, would say you could breastfeed much longer and still have benefits. This recommendation, the 6 months to 2 years, was based on evidence of the continued benefits of breast milk into toddlerhood and prompted calls for breastfeeding mothers to have more support in order to do that. If you or someone you know is struggling with breastfeeding, it's not easy. Definitely check out the interview with my lactation consultant, Andrea Sims Brown. It's an episode as well as a written version on getwellbe.com, and it's just phenomenal. She helped me so much. Story number 7. A new study tied greater consumption of tuna and other fish to an increased risk of melanoma, the deadliest type of skin cancer. They hypothesized that this may be not due to the fish itself, but to the contaminants within it, like dioxins, arsenic, and mercury. The study looked at almost 500,000 adults and found that those who ate the most fish on average had a 22% higher risk of malignant melanoma than those who ate little fish. Still, other studies show the consumption of fish high in omega-3s, such as wild salmon, can protect against melanoma. So experts were puzzled. They don't have a definitive reason for this, but they don't advise skipping fish as a way to protect against skin cancer, but rather choosing only low mercury fish, as they believe it's actually the mercury and other heavy metals that is contributing to the skin cancer risk, not the fish itself. Story number 8. A treatment for depression called transcranial magnetic stimulation, or TMS, has been used for years, but it takes months to work. A new therapy dubbed Stanford Neuromodulation Therapy, SNT, also uses magnetic fields to stimulate the brain but works much more quickly. Experts still aren't entirely sure how it works, but the evidence says it does, especially for those whose depression hasn't responded to therapy or medication. Although now we realize why those SSRIs may not have been working, right? With SNT, patients get 10 treatments a day for 5 days. That's certainly faster than months, and a new study shows that the approach can result in a 52% reduction in depression symptoms as compared to a control group that saw only an 11% reduction. That's amazing. One, the 11% reduction shows you the incredible power of the mind to heal and the placebo effect, which is very strong, but also that this magnetic therapy is very exciting with a 52% reduction in depression symptoms. So that's very exciting. Now, story number 9. Don't make candy lovers mad. A new lawsuit from a woman in Oakland accuses Mars Inc., the manufacturer of Skittles, of selling a product that's unfit for human consumption. The lawsuit alleges that Skittles contain high levels of titanium dioxide, which has been associated with a whole host of health problems and is banned for consumption in the EU. Taste the rainbow of toxins. We've long recommended skipping anything artificially colored and have seen the amazing evidence that it affects children's brains and people's brains in general. And now a lawsuit is backing that up. Story number 10. We've been covering the whole saga around Johnson & Johnson baby powder and allegations it causes cancer for some time. Finally, the chapter appears to be coming to a close. After tens of thousands of lawsuits, tens of thousands is a lot of lawsuits, by the way, alleging that asbestos in the product can cause cancer, the company is fully abandoning its talc-based baby powder next year and will now make it with cornstarch. The company still denies that, obviously for legal reasons, their talcum powder is the cause of ovarian cancer, but has decided to put the issue to rest by getting rid of it entirely. Consider this a consumer awareness and advocacy win. Story number 11. A large new study draws a direct line between dairy intake and prostate cancer risk. The study used questionnaires and phone calls to track the dairy intake of over 28,000 North American men, and then compared these findings with prostate cancer registries over nearly 8-year period. They found that men who consumed about 430 grams of dairy per day, almost 2 cups of milk, had a 25% increased risk of prostate cancer as compared to men who only consumed about 20 grams of dairy per day, the equivalent of half a cup of milk per week. So if you've been having a quarter or half a cup of milk per day in coffee or in cereal, that's clearly way too much. We want to keep it to about a half a cup of milk if you're thinking about your prostate cancer risk. Notably, non-dairy sources of calcium didn't increase risk at all, suggesting that there's something specific about dairy from cows. One theory is that this is due to the sex hormone content of dairy milk, since up to 75% of dairy cows are pregnant, and prostate cancer is a hormone-related cancer. This theory also echoes previous research that tied dairy intake to breast cancer. So this is all making a lot of sense. Story number 12, and we left this one for last because of October being Breast Cancer Awareness Month. This is about breast implants and the connection to cancer. So once a breast implant is put in, scar tissue begins to form around it, and a certain rare type of lymphoma, which is a cancer of the lymphatic system, can develop in the scar tissue. Research shows that the risk of this happening is higher in women with textured implants, which women choose because they tend to stay in position better. In 2011, the FDA first reported a possible link between saline and silicone breast implants and lymphoma. And in 2020, they ordered that breast implants be labeled with a warning. So can you believe it took 9 years for a possible link and then a warning to be put on? However, their understanding of how serious the risk appears to be way off. A new study looked at cases of breast implant-related lymphoma over an 18-year period from 2000 to 2018 and found not only that the rate was increasing over that time, but also that instances were more than double the FDA estimates. Their findings showed that there were 8.1 million cases per 100 million women, while the FDA put that number at about 3 million cases per 100 million women. Now that's it for the July to September WellBe wrap-up. Now I'd love to know, is there someone or multiple people in your life who might benefit from knowing this information? If so, share this episode with them, or if you think they prefer to have the link so they can dive into the research further, share the link to the written version of this on getwellbe.com. It's in the show notes. Knowledge is power, and it's also the first step towards change. Remember when people didn't know how dangerous cigarettes were? Now they do, because of some very brave people who found this information out and got it to the public. Now people make very different choices because they have this knowledge, and hundreds of millions of lives around the globe have been saved as a result. If you do head to getwellbe.com to read more, make sure you become a WellBe insider while you're there so you can get all of our latest content and special offers weekly in your inbox, including the Spark Health Product and Lifestyle Detox Program, a 6-week or 6-module program that you can take for as long as you want, which is 50% off on sale right now in honor of Breast Cancer Awareness Month, which is October. Plus, in your first welcome email, you'll get a free copy of my audio guide on how to feel the best you've ever felt and heal anything. The 10 things you need to optimize your health and heal any health issue, big or small, naturally. Even if you're the healthiest person out there, I promise you'll learn something you didn't know that can optimize your health. And if you haven't already and found this episode helpful or interesting, subscribe to the podcast. This way you'll never miss a new episode, and they'll be delivered to you whenever we publish a new one. This is your host, Adrienne Nolan-Smith, and thanks for listening to the WellBe Podcast.